Chapter 15. Development of the butter situation. A bally miracle, it seemed to me at the moment, but of course there was a simple explanation. "I was hoping that you would not have left the grounds, sir," he said. "I've been searching for you for some little time. On learning that the scullery maid had become a victim of hysterics as the result of opening the back door and observing a black man, I sprang to the conclusion that you must have been calling there, no doubt with a view to seeing me. Has something gone wrong, sir?" I wiped the brow. "Jeeves," I said, "I feel like a lost child that has found its mother." "Indeed, sir. If you don't mind me calling you a mother." "Not at all, sir." "Thank you, Jeeves. Then there is something wrong, sir." "Wrong? You said it. What are those sore things people find themselves in?" "Straits, sir. I am in the sorest straits, Jeeves. To start with, I found that soap and water wouldn't get this stuff off." "No, sir. I should have informed you that butter is a sine qua non." Well, I was on the point of getting butter when Brinkley, my man, you know, suddenly blew in and burned the house down." "Too bad, sir." "The expression 'too bad' scarcely overstates it, Jeeves. It landed me in the dickens of a hole. I came here. I tried to get in touch with you, but that scullery maid gummed up that project." "A temperamental girl, sir, and by an unfortunate coincidence she and the cook at the moment of your arrival had just been occupying themselves with the Ouija board, with, I believe, some interesting results. She appears to have regarded you as a materialized spirit." I quivered a bit. "If cooks would stick to their roasts and hashes," I said rather severely, "and not waste their time in psychical research, life would be a very different thing." "Quite true, sir. Well, then I ran into Chuffy. He stoutly declined to lend me butter." "Indeed, sir." "He was in a very unpleasant mood." "His lordship is undergoing a good deal of mental anguish at the moment, sir." "I could see that. He left me apparently to go for a country ramble. At this time of night." "Physical exercise is a recognized palliative when the heart is aching, sir." "Well, I mustn't think too harshly of Chuffy. I must always remember that he kicked Brinkley properly. It did me good to watch him. And now you've turned up all is well. The happy ending, what?" "Precisely, sir. I shall be delighted to procure you butter. Can I still catch the 10:21? "I fear not, sir. But I have ascertained that there is another train as late as 11:50. "Then I'm on velvet." "Yes, sir." I breathed deeply. The relief was great. "I shouldn't wonder if you couldn't even dig me up a packet of sandwiches for the journey, what?" "Certainly, sir." "And a drop of something?" "Undoubtedly, sir." Then, if you happen to have such a thing as a cigarette on your person at this moment, everything would be more or less perfect." "Turkish or Virginian, sir?" "Both." There's nothing like a quiet cigarette for soothing the system. For some moments I puffed luxuriously, and my nerves, which had been sticking out of my body an inch long and curled at the ends, gradually slipped into place again. I felt restored and invigorated and in a mood for conversation. "What was all that yelling about, Jeeves?" "Sir?" "Just before I met Chuffy, animal cries started to proceed from somewhere in the house. It sounded like Seabury." "It was Master Seabury, sir. He's a little fractious tonight." "What's biting him?" "He is somewhat acutely disappointed, sir, at having missed the Negro entertainment on the yacht." "Absolutely his own fault, the silly little geezer. If he wanted to go to Dwight's birthday party, he shouldn't have started a scrap with him." "Just so, sir." "To attempt to touch your host for 1 and 6pence protection money on the eve of a birthday party is the act of a fathead." "Very true, sir." "What did they do about him? He seems to have stopped yelling. Did they chloroform him?" "No, sir. I understand that steps are being taken to provide something in the nature of an alternative entertainment for the little fellow." "How do you mean, Jeeves? Are they having the niggers up here?" "No, sir. The expense rules that project out of the sphere of practical politics. But I understand that her ladyship has induced Sir Roderick Glossop to offer his services." I couldn't follow this. "Old Glossop?" "Yes, sir." "But what can he do?" "It appears, sir, that he has a pleasing baritone voice, and as a younger man, in the days when he was a medical student, was often accustomed to render songs at smoking concerts and similar entertainments." "Old Glossop?" "Yes, sir. I overheard him telling her ladyship so." "Well, I'd never have thought it." "I agree that one would scarcely suspect such a thing from his bearing nowadays, sir. Tempora mutanta nos et mutanta in illis. Then you mean that he's going to soothe young Seabury with song? Yes, sir, accompanied by her ladyship on the piano. I spotted the snag. It won't work, Jeeves. Reason it out for yourself. Sir? Well, here's a kid who's been looking forward to seeing a troupe of nigger minstrels do their stuff. Is he likely to accept as an adequate substitute a white-faced loony doctor accompanied by his mother on the piano? Not white-faced, sir. What? No, sir. The question was debated, and it was her ladyship's view that something in the nature of a negroid performance was indispensable. The young gentleman, when in his present frame of mind, is always extremely exigent. I swallowed a puff of smoke the wrong way in my emotion. Old Glossop isn't blacking up. Yes, sir. Jeeves, pull yourself together. This can't be true. He's blacking his face. Yes, sir. It isn't possible. Sir Roderick is very amenable at the moment, sir. You must remember, to any suggestion emanating from her ladyship. You mean he's in love? Yes, sir. And love conquers all? Yes, sir. But even so... If you were in love, Jeeves, would you black up to entertain the son of the adored object? No, sir. But we are not all constituted alike. True. Sir Roderick did endeavour to protest, but her ladyship overruled his objections, and as a matter of fact, sir, I think that on the whole it is a good thing that she did. Sir Roderick's kindly act will serve to heal the breach between Master Seabury and himself. I happen to know that the young gentleman has been unsuccessful in his endeavour to extract protection money from Sir Roderick, and was resenting the fact keenly. He tried to gouge the old boy? Yes, sir, for 10 shillings. I have the information from the young gentleman himself. They all confide in you, Jeeves? Yes, sir. And old Glossop wouldn't kick in? No, sir. Instead, he read the young gentleman something of a lecture, what the young gentleman described as pie jaws, and I happen to know that hard feelings existed as a consequence on the latter's side, so much so indeed that I received the impression that he'd been planning something in the nature of a reprisal. He wouldn't have the nerve to do the dirty on a future stepfather, would he? Young gentlemen are headstrong, sir. True. One recalls the case of my Aunt Agatha's son, young Toss, and the cabinet minister. Yes, sir. In a spirit of ill will, he marooned him on an island in the lake with a swan. Yes, sir. How is the swanning in these parts? I confess that I would like to see old Glossop shinning up something with a bilious bird after him. I fancy that Master Seabury's thoughts turned more towards something on the order of a booby-trap, sir. They would. No imagination, that kid, no vision. I've often noticed it. His fancy is, what's the word? Pedestrian, sir? Exactly. With all the limitless opportunities of a large country house at his disposal, he's content to put soot and water on top of the door, a thing you could do in a suburban villa. I've never thought highly of Seabury, and this confirms my low opinion. Not soot and water, sir. I think what the young gentleman had in mind was the old-fashioned butter slide, sir. He was asking me yesterday where the butter was kept, and referred guardedly to a humorous film he had seen not long ago in Bristol, in which something of that nature occurred. I was disgusted. Goodness knows that any outrage perpetrated on the person of a bloke like Sir Roderick Glossop touches a ready chord in Bertram Wooster's bosom, but a butter slide, the lowest depths, as you might say, the merest ABC of the booby-trapping art. There isn't a fellow at the drones who would sink to such a thing. I started to utter a scornful laugh, then stopped. The word had reminded me that life was stern and earnest, and that time was passing. Butter, Jeeves, here we are standing idly here talking of butter, and all the time you ought to have been racing to the larder getting me some. I will go immediately, sir. You know where to lay your hand on it, all right? Yes, sir. And you're sure it'll do the trick? Quite sure, sir. Then shift ho, Jeeves, and don't loiter. I sat down on an upturned flower-pot and resumed my vigil. My feelings were very different now from what they'd been when first I'd begun to roost on this desirable property. Then I'd been a penniless outcast, so to speak, with nothing much of a future before me. Now I could see daylight. Presently Jeeves would return with the fixings. Shortly after that I should be the old pink-cheeked clubman once more, and in due season I should be safely inside the 11:50 train on my way to London and safety. I was a good deal uplifted. I drank in the night air with a light heart, and it was while I was drinking it in that a sudden uproar proceeded from the house. Seabury appeared to be contributing most of it. He was yelling his bally head off. From time to time one caught the fainter yet penetrating note of the Dowager Lady Chuffnell. She seemed to be reproaching or upbraiding someone. Blending with this there could be discerned a deeper voice, the unmistakable baritone woofle of Sir Roderick Glossop. The whole appeared to be proceeding from the drawing-room, and except for one time when I was sauntering in Hyde Park and suddenly found myself mixed up in a community singing, I've never heard anything like it. It couldn't have been very long after this when the front door was suddenly flung open. Somebody emerged, the door slammed, and then the emerger started to stump rapidly down the drive in the direction of the gates. There'd been just a moment when the light from the hall shone upon this bloke. It had been long enough for me to identify him. This sudden Exeter, who was now padding away into the darkness with every outward sign of being fed to the eye-teeth, was none other than Sir Roderick Glossop. And his face, I noted, was as black as the ace of spades. A few moments later, while I was still wondering what it was all about and generally turning the thing over in my mind, I observed Jeeves looming up on the right flank. I was glad to see him. I desired enlightenment. What was all that, Jeeves? The disturbance, sir. It sounded as if little Seabury was being murdered. No such luck, I take it? The young gentleman was the victim of a personal assault, sir, at the hands of Sir Roderick Glossop. I was not an actual eyewitness of the episode. I derive my information from Mary, the parlour-maid, who was present in person. Present? Peeping through the door, sir. Sir Roderick's appearance when she encountered him by chance on the stairs seems to have affected the girl powerfully, and she tells me that she had followed him about in a stealthy manner ever since, waiting to see what he would do next. I gather that his aspect fascinated her. She is inclined to be somewhat frivolous in her mental attitude, like so many of these young girls, sir. And what occurred? The affair may be said to have had its inception, sir, when Sir Roderick, passing through the hall, stepped upon the young gentleman's butter slide. Ah, so he put that project through, did he? Yes, sir. And Sir Roderick came a stinker? He appears to have fallen with some heaviness, sir. The girl Mary spoke of it with a good deal of animation. She compared his descent to the delivery of a ton of coals. I confess the imagery somewhat surprised me, for she is not a highly imaginative girl. I smiled appreciatively. The evening, I felt, might have begun rockily, but it was certainly ending well. Incensed by this, Sir Roderick appears to have hastened to the drawing-room, where he immediately subjected Master Seabury to a severe castigation. Her ladyship vainly endeavoured to induce him to desist, but he was firm in his refusal. The upshot of the matter was a definite rift between her ladyship and Sir Roderick, the former stating that she never wished to see him again, the latter asseverating that if he could once get safely out of this pestilential house, he would never darken its doors again. A real mix-up? Yes, sir. And the engagement's off? Yes, sir. The affection which her ladyship felt for Sir Roderick was instantaneously swept away on the tidal wave of injured mother love. Rather well put, Jeeves. Thank you, sir. Then Sir Roderick has pushed off forever? Apparently, sir. A lot of trouble Chuffnell Hall is seeing these days, almost as if there was a curse on the place. If one were superstitious, one might certainly suppose so, sir. Well, if there wasn't a curse on it before, you can bet there are about 57 now. I heard old Glossop applying them as he passed. He was much moved, I take it, sir? Very much moved, Jeeves. So I should imagine, sir, or he would scarcely have left the house in that condition. How do you mean? Well, sir, if you consider, it will scarcely be feasible for him to return to his hotel in the existing circumstances. His appearance would excite remark, nor, after what has occurred, can he very well return to the hall. I saw what he was driving at. Good Lord, Jeeves, you open up a new line of thought. Let me just review this. He can't go to his hotel, no, I see that. And he can't crawl back to the Dowager Lady C and ask for shelter, no, I see that too. It's a dead stymie. I can't imagine what on earth he'll do. It is something of a problem, sir. I was silent for a moment, pensive, and oddly enough, for you would have thought my mood would have been one of sober joy, the heart was really rather bleeding a bit. Do you know, Jeeves, scurvily as that man has treated me in the past, I can't help feeling sorry for him. I do, absolutely. He's in such an awful jam. It was bad enough for me, being a black-faced wanderer, but I hadn't the position to keep up that he has. I mean to say, the world, observing me in this condition, might quite easily just have shrugged its shoulders and murmured, "Young blood," or words to that effect, what? Yes, sir. But not with a bloke of his standing. Very true, sir. Well, well, well. Dear, dear, dear. I suppose if you come right down to it, this is the vengeance of heaven. Quite possibly, sir. It isn't often that I point the moral, but I couldn't help doing it now. It just shows how we ought always to be kind even to the humblest, Jeeves. For years this glossop has trampled on my face with spiked shoes, and see where it's landed him. What would have happened if we'd been on chummy terms at this juncture? He would have been on velvet. Observing him shooting past just now, I should have stopped him. I should have called out to him, "Hi, Sir Roderick, half a second, don't go roaming about the place in make-up. Stick around here for a while, and pretty soon Jeeves will be arriving with the necessary butter, and all will be well." Shouldn't I have said that, Jeeves? Something of that general trend, no doubt, sir. And he would have been saved from this fearful situation, this sore strait in which he now finds himself. I dare say that man won't be able to get butter till well on in the morning. Not even then, if he hasn't money on the person. And all because he wouldn't treat me decently in the past. Makes you think a bit, that, Jeeves, what? Yes, sir. But it's no use talking about it, of course. What's done is done. Very true, sir. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all our piety and wit can lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out a word of it. Quite. And now, Jeeves, the butter. I must be getting about my business. He sighed in a respectful sort of way. I am extremely sorry to be obliged to inform you, sir, that owing to Master Seabury having used it all for his slide, there is no butter in the house. Chapter 16. Trouble at the Dower House. I stood there with my hand out, frozen to the spot. The faculties seemed numbed. I remember once when I was in New York, one of those sad-eyed Italian kids who whiz about Washington Square on roller skates suddenly projected himself with extraordinary violence at my waistcoat as I strolled to and from, taking the air. He reached journey's end right on the third button from the top, and I had much the same sensation now as I had had then, a sort of stricken feeling, stunned, breathless, as if somebody had walloped the old soul unexpectedly with a sandbag. What? Yes, sir. No butter? No butter, sir. But, Jeeves, this is frightful. Most disturbing, sir. If Jeeves has a fault, it's that his demeanour on these occasions too frequently tends to be rather more calm and unemotional than one could wish. One lodges no protest as a rule, because he generally has the situation well in hand, and loses no time in coming before the board with one of his ripe solutions. But I've often felt that I could do with a little more leaping about with rolling eyeballs on his part, and I felt it now. At a moment like the present, the adjective disturbing seemed to me to miss the fact by about 10 parasangs. But what shall I do? I fear that it will be necessary to postpone the cleansing of your face till a later date, sir. I shall be in a position to supply you with butter tomorrow. But tonight? Tonight, I'm afraid, sir, you must be content to remain in statu quo. Huh? A Latin expression, sir. You mean nothing can be done till tomorrow? I fear not, sir. It is vexing. You would go so far as to describe it as that? Yes, sir, most vexing. I breathed a bit tensely. Oh, well, just as you say, Jeeves. I pondered. And what do I do in the meantime? As you have had a somewhat trying evening, I think it would be best, sir, if you were to get a good sleep. On the lawn? If I might make the suggestion, sir, I think you would be more comfortable in the Dower House. It's only a short distance across the park, and it is unoccupied. It can't be. They wouldn't leave it empty. One of the gardeners is acting as caretaker while her ladyship and Master Seabury are visiting the hall, but at this hour he's always down at the Ch15 Arms in the village. It would be quite simple for you to effect an entrance and establish yourself in one of the upper rooms without his cognizance, and tomorrow morning I could join you there with the necessary materials. I confess it wasn't my idea of a frightfully large evening. You've nothing brighter to suggest? No, sir. You wouldn't consider letting me have your bed for the night? No, sir. Then I might as well be moving. Yes, sir. Good night, Jeeves, I said moodily. Good night, sir. It didn't take me long to get to the dower house, and the trip seemed shorter than it actually was because my mind was occupied in transit with a sort of series of silent hymns of hate, directed at the various blokes who'd combined to land me in what Jeeves would have called this vexing situation, featuring little Seabury. The more I thought of this stripling, the more the iron entered into my soul. And one result of my meditations regarding him was to engender, an emotion towards Sir Roderick Glossop which came pretty near to being a spirit of kindliness. You know how it is. You go along for years looking on a fellow as a blister and a menace to the public weal, and then one day you suddenly hear of some decent thing he's done, and it makes you feel there must be good in the chap after all. It was so in the matter of this Glossop. I had suffered much at his hands since first our paths had crossed. In the human zoo which fate has caused to centre about Bertie Wooster, he'd always ranked high up among the more vicious specimens. Many good judges, indeed, considering that he even competed for the blue ribbon with that great scourge of modern times, my Aunt Agatha. But now, reviewing his recent conduct, I must admit that I found myself definitely softening towards him. Nobody, I reasoned, who could slosh young Seabury like that could be altogether bad. There must be fine metal somewhere among the dross. And I actually went so far as to say to myself with something of a rush of emotion that if ever things so shaped themselves that I could go freely about my affairs again, I would look the man up and endeavour to fraternize with him. I'd even reached the stage of toying with the idea of a nice little lunch with him on one side of the table and me on the other, sucking down some good dry vintage wine and chatting like old friends, when I found that I had arrived at the outskirts of the dower house. This bin, or depository for the widows of deceased Lords Chuffnell, was a medium-sized sort of shack standing in what the advertisements described as spacious and commodious grounds. You entered by a 5-barred gate set in a box hedge and approached by a short gravel drive, unless you're planning to break in through a lower window, in which case you sneaked along a grass border, skipping silently from tree to tree. This is what I did, though at a casual glance it didn't seem really necessary. The place looked deserted. Still, so far, of course, I'd only seen the front of it, and if the gardener in charge had changed his policy of going down to the local pub for a refresher at this hour and was still on the premises, he'd be round at the back. It was thither, therefore, that I now directed the footsteps, making them as snaky as possible. I can't say I liked the prospect before me. Jeeves had spoken airily, or glibly, of busting in and making myself at home for the night. But my experience has been that whenever I try to do a bit of burgling, something always goes wrong. I hadn't yet forgotten that time Bingo Little persuaded me to break into his house and pinch the dictaphone record of the mushy article his wife, née Rosie M. Banks, the well-known female novelist, had written about him for my Aunt Dahlia's paper, Milady's Boudoir. Pekingese, parlourmaids, and policemen had entered into the affair, you may remember, causing me despondency and alarm, and I didn't want anything of that nature happening again. So it was with a pretty goodish amount of caution that I now sidled round to the back, and when the first thing the eye fell on was the kitchen door standing ajar, I didn't rush in with the vim I would have displayed a year or so earlier, before life had made me the grim, suspicious man I am today, but stood there cocking a wary eye at it. It might be all right. On the other hand, it might not be all right. Time alone could tell. The next moment I was dashed glad I'd held off, because I suddenly heard someone whistling in the house, and I saw what that meant. It meant that the gardener bloke, instead of going down to the Chuffnell Arms for a snifter, had decided to stay home and have a quiet evening among his books. So much for Jeeves's authoritative inside information. I drew back into the shadows like a leopard, feeling pretty peeved. I felt that Jeeves had no right to say that fellows went down to the village for a spot at such and such a time when they didn't. And then suddenly something happened that threw an entirely new light on the position of affairs, and I saw that I'd misjudged the honest fellow. The whistling stopped. There was a single brief hiccup, and then from inside came the sound of somebody singing "Lead Kindly Light." The occupant of the dower house was no mere gardener. It was Moscow's pride, the unspeakable Brinkley, who lurked therein. The situation seemed to me to call for careful, unhurried thought. The whole trouble with fellows like Brinkley is that in dealing with them you can't go by the form book. They are such in-and-out performers. Tonight, for instance, within the space of little more than an hour, I'd seen this man ravening to and fro with a carving knife, and also tolerantly submitting to having himself kicked by Chuffy practically the whole length of the Chuffnell Hall Drive. It all seemed to be a question of what mood he happened to be in at the time. If, therefore, I was compelled to ask myself, I were to walk boldly into the dower house now, which manifestation of this many-sided man would greet me? Should I find a deferential lover of peace, whom it would be both simple and agreeable to take by the slack of the trousers and bung out? Or should I have to spend the remainder of the night racing up and down the stairs with him a short head behind me? And arising out of this, what had become of that carving knife of his? As far as I could ascertain, he didn't appear to have it on his person during the interview with Chuffy, but then on the other hand he might simply have left it somewhere and collected it again by now. Reviewing the matter from every angle, I decided to remain where I was. At the next moment the trend of events showed that the decision had been a wise one. He just got as far as that bit about "the night is dark," and seemed to be going strong, though a little uncertain in the lower register, when he suddenly broke off. And the next thing I heard was a most frightful outbreak of shoutings and clumpings and bangings. What had set him off I could not, of course, say, but the sounds left little room for doubt that for some reason or other the fellow had abruptly returned to what I might call the carving knife phase. On the advantages of being in the country, if you belong, like Brinkley, to the more aggressive type of loony, is that you have great freedom of movement. The sort of row he was making now, if made in, let's say, Grosvenor Square or Cadogan Terrace, would infallibly have produced posses of policemen within the first 2 minutes. Windows would have been raised, whistles blown. But in the peaceful seclusion of the dower house Chuffnell Regis he was granted the widest scope for self-expression. Except for the hall, there wasn't another house within a mile, and even the hall was too far away for the ghastly uproar he was making to be more than a faint murmur. As to what he thought he was chasing, there again one could make no certain pronouncement. It might be that the gardener caretaker hadn't gone to the village after all, and was now wishing that he had. Or it might be, of course, that a fellow in Brinkley's sozzled condition didn't require a definite object of the chase, but simply chased rainbows, so to speak, for the sake of the exercise. I was inclining to this latter view, and wondering a little wistfully if there mightn't be a chance of him falling downstairs and breaking his neck, when I found out that I'd been wrong. For some minutes the noise had grown somewhat fainter, activities seeming to have shifted to some distant part of the house, but now it suddenly hotted up again. I heard feet clattering downstairs, then there was a terrific crash, and immediately after that the back door was burst open and out shot a human form. It whizzed rapidly in my direction, tripped over something, and came a perler almost at my feet. And I was about to commend my soul to God and jump on its gizzard, hoping for the best, when something in the tone of the comments it was making, a sort of educated profanity which seemed to give evidence of a better bringing up than Brinkley could possibly have had, made me pause. I bent down. My diagnosis had been correct. It was Sir Roderick Glossop. I was just going to introduce myself and institute inquiries when the back door swung open again and another figure appeared. "And stay out!" it observed, with a good deal of bitterness. The voice was Brinkley's. It was some small pleasure to me at a none too festive time to note that he was rubbing his left shin. The door slammed and I heard the bolts shot. The next moment a tenor voice rendering Rock of Ages showed that as far as Brinkley was concerned, the episode was concluded. Sir Roderick had scrambled to his feet and was standing puffing a good bit, as if touched in the wind. I wasn't surprised, for the going had been fast. It struck me as a good moment to start the dialogue. "What-ho, what-ho?" I said. It seemed to be rather my fate on this particular night to stir up my fellow man, not to mention my fellow scullery maid. But judging by results, the magnetic force of my personality appeared to be a bit on the wane. I mean to say, while the scullery maid had had hysterics and Chuffy had jumped a foot, This gloss-up merely quivered like something in aspic when joggled on the dish. But this, of course, may have been because that was all he was physically able to do. These breathers with Brinkley take it out of a man. "It's all right," I continued, anxious to set him at his ease and remove the impression that what was murmuring in his ear was some fearful creature of the night. "Only B. Wooster." "Mr. Wooster?" "Absolutely." "Good God," he said, becoming a little more tranquil, though still far from the life and soul of the party. "Oof!" And there the matter rested, while he took in a supply of life-giving air. I remained silent. We Woosters do not intrude at such a time. Presently the puffing died away to a soft whiffle. He took about another minute and a half off, and when he spoke there was something so subdued, so what you might call quavering about his voice, that I came within a toucher of placing a kindly arm round his shoulder and telling him to cheer up. "No doubt you are wondering, Mr. Wooster, what is the explanation of all this?" I still wasn't quite equal to the kindly arm, but I did bestow a sort of encouraging pat. "Not a bit," I said, "not a bit. I know all. I'm abreast of the whole situation. I heard what had happened at the hall, and directly I saw you shoot out of that door, I knew what must have occurred here. You were planning to spend the night in the dower house, weren't you?" "I was. If you've really been apprised of what took place at Chafnor Hall, Mr. Wooster, you're aware that I'm in the unfortunate position of—" "Being blacked out, I know. So am I." "You?" "Yes, it's a long story, and I couldn't tell you anyway, because it's by the way of being secret history. But you can take it from me that we're both in the same fix." "But this is astonishing." "You can't go back to your hotel, and I can't get up to London till we've taken the make-up off." "Good God!" "It seems to bring us very close together, what?" He breathed deeply. "Mr. Wooster, we've had our differences in the past. The fault may have been mine, I cannot say, but in this crisis we must forget them and, stick together?"
"Precisely."
"We will," I said cordially. "Speaking for myself, I decided to let the dead past bury its dead when I heard that you'd been giving little Seabury 1 or 2 on the spot indicated." I heard him snort.
"You are aware what that abominable boy did to me, Mr. Wooster?"
"Rather, and what you did to him. I'm thoroughly posted up to the time you left the hall. What happened after that?"
"Almost immediately after I had done so, the realization of my terrible position came upon me."
"Nasty jar, I imagine?"
"The shock was of the severest. I was at a complete loss. The only course it seemed possible to pursue was to seek refuge somewhere for the night, and knowing the dower house to be unoccupied, I repaired thither."
He shuddered.
"Mr. Wooster, that house is, I speak in all seriousness, an inferno."
He puffed a while.
"I am not alluding to the presence on the premises of what appeared to me to be a dangerous lunatic. I mean that the whole place is congested with living organisms. Mice, Mr. Wooster, and small dogs, and I think I saw a monkey."
"Eh?"
"I remember now that Lady Chafnor informed me that her son had started to maintain an establishment of these creatures, but at the moment it had slipped my mind, and the experience came upon me without warning or preparation."
"Of course, yes. Seabury breeds things. I remember him telling me. And you were snooted by the menagerie?" He stirred in the darkness. I fancy he was mopping the bee.
"Shall I tell you of my experiences beneath that roof, Mr. Wooster?"
"Do," I said cordially. "We have the night before us." He handkerchiefed the brow once more.
"It was a nightmare. I had scarcely entered the place when a voice addressed me from a dark corner of the kitchen, which was the room in which I first found myself. 'I see you, you old muddler,' was the phrase it employed.
Dashed familiar.
I need scarcely tell you what consternation it occasioned me. I bit my tongue severely. Then, divining that the speaker was merely a parrot, I hastened from the room. I had scarcely reached the stairs when I observed a hideous form, a little, short, broad, bow-legged individual with long arms and a dark, wizened face. He was wearing clothes of some description, and he walked rapidly, lurching from side to side and gibbering. In my present cool frame of mind, I realized that it must have been a monkey, but at the time—"
"What a home!" I said sympathetically. "And little Seabury, and what a home!"
How about the mice?" "They came later. Allow me, if you will, to adhere to the chronological sequence of my misadventures, or I shall be unable to relate the story coherently. The room in which I next found myself appeared to be completely filled with small dogs. They pounced upon me, snuffling and biting at me. I escaped and entered another room. Here at last, I was saying to myself, even in this sinister and ill-omened house there must be peace. Mr. Wooster, I had hardly framed the thought when something ran up my right trouser leg. I sprang to one side, and in so doing upset what appeared to be a box or cage of some kind. I found myself in a sea of mice. I detest the creatures. I endeavoured to brush them off. They clung the more. I fled from the room, and I had scarcely reached the stairs when this lunatic appeared and pursued me. He pursued me up and down the stairs, Mr. Wooster." I nodded understandingly. "We all go through it," I said. "I had the same experience." "You?" "Rather. He nearly got me with a carving knife." "As far as I could discern, the weapon he carried was more of the order of a chopper." "He varies," I explained. "Now the carving knife, and non the chopper. Versatile chap. It's the artistic temperament, I suppose." "You speak as if you knew this man." "I do more than know him. I employ him. He's my valet." "Your valet?" "Fellow named Brinkley. He won't be my valet long, mind you, if he ever simmers down enough for me to get near him and give him the sack." "Ironical, that, when you come to think of it," I said, for I was in a philosophic mood. "I mean, do you realize that I'm giving this chap a salary all this time? In other words, he's actually being paid to chivvy me about with carving knives. If that's not life," I said thoughtfully, "what is?" It seemed to take the old boy a moment or two to drink this in. "Your valet? Then what's he doing in the dower house?" "Oh, he's a mobile sort of fellow, you know. Now here, now there. He flits. He was at the hall not long ago." "I never heard of such a thing." "New to me, too, I must confess. Well, you're certainly having a lively night. This'll last you, what? I mean, you won't need any more excitement for months and months and months?" "Mr. Wooster, my earnest hope is that the entire remainder of my existence will be one round of unruffled monotony. Tonight I have seemed to sense the underlying horror of life. You don't suppose that there could possibly be mice on my person still?" "Oh, you must have shaken them off, I should say. You were pretty active, you know. I could only hear you, of course, but you seemed to be leaping from crag to crag, as it were." "Certainly I spared no effort to elude this man, Brinkley. It was merely that I fancied I felt something nibbling at my left shoulder blade." "You've had quite a night, haven't you?" "A truly terrible night. I shall not readily recover a normal tranquillity of mind. My pulse is still high, and I do not like the way my heart is beating. However, by a merciful good fortune, all has ended well. You will be able to give me the shelter I so sorely need in your cottage, and there will be the assistance of a little soap and water. I shall be able to wash off this distasteful blacking." I saw that this was where I had to start breaking things gently to him. "You can't get that stuff off with soap and water. I've tried. You have to have butter." "The point strikes me as immaterial. You can provide butter, no doubt." "Sorry, no butter." "There must be butter in your cottage." "There isn't. And why? Because there isn't a cottage." "I cannot understand you." "It burned down." "What?" "Yes, Brinkley did it." "Good God!" "A nuisance in many ways, I must confess." He was silent for a space, turning the thing over in his mind, looking at it from this angle and that. "Your cottage is really burned down?" "Heap of ashes." "Then what is to be done?" It seemed time to point out the silver lining. "Be of good cheer," I said. "We may not be so well off for cottages, but the butter situation, I'm happy to say, is reasonably bright. We can't get any tonight, but it cometh in the morning, so to speak. Jeeves is going to bring me some as soon as the dairyman delivers." "But I cannot remain in this condition till morning." "Only course to pursue, I'm afraid." He brooded. Hard to see in the darkness, but discontentedly, I thought, as if his haughty spirit fretted somewhat. He must have been doing some good, solid thinking, too, because suddenly he came to life with an idea. "This cottage of yours, had it a garage?" "Oh, yes." "Was that burned down also?"
No, I fancy it escaped the Holocaust. It was well away from the scene of conflagration.
Is there petrol in it?
Oh, yes, lots of petrol.
Oh, why then all is well, Mr. Wooster. I am convinced that petrol will prove a cleansing agent equally as efficacious as butter.
But dash it, you can't go to my garage.
Why not, pray?
Well, yes, you could, if you liked, I suppose. Not me, though. For reasons which I'm not prepared to divulge, I propose to spend the rest of the night in the summer house on the main lawn of the hall.
You will not accompany me?
Sorry, no.
Then good night, Mr. Wooster. I will not keep you any longer from your rest. I am greatly obliged to you for the assistance you have accorded me in a trying situation. We must see more of one another. Let us lunch together one of these days. How do I obtain access to this garage of yours?
You'll have to bust a window.
I will do so.
He pushed off, full of buck and determination, and I, with a dubious shake of the old onion, trickled along towards the summer house. Chapter 17. Breakfast time at the hall. I don't know if you've ever spent the night in a summer house. If not, avoid making the experiment. It's not a thing I would advise any friend of mine to do. On the subject of sleeping in summer houses, I will speak out fearlessly. As far as I've been able to ascertain, such a binge doesn't present a single attractive feature. Apart from the inevitable discomfort in the fleshy parts, there's the cold. And apart from the cold, there's the mental anguish. All the ghost stories you've ever read go flitting through the mind, particularly any you know, where fellows are found next morning absolutely dead, without a mark on them, but with such a look of horror and fear in their eyes that the search party draw in their breath a bit and gaze at each other as much as to say, "What ho?" Things creak. You fancy you hear stealthy footsteps. You receive the impression that a goodish quota of skinny hands are reaching out for you in the darkness. And, as I say, the cold extremely severe and much discomfort in the fleshy parts. The whole constituting a pretty sticky experience, and one to be avoided by the knowledgeable. And what made the thing so dashed poignant in my case was the thought that if I'd only had the nerve to accompany intrepid old Glossop to the garage, there would have been no need for me to stay marooned in this smelly structure, listening to the wind howling through the chinks in the woodwork. Once at the garage, I mean to say, I could not only have scoured the face, but could have hopped into the old two-seater, which was champing at its bit there, and tooled off to London by road, singing a gypsy song, as it were. And I simply couldn't muster up the nerve to take a pop at it. The garage, I reflected, was right in the danger zone, well inside the Vowles and Dobson belt, and I absolutely couldn't face the possibility of running into Police Sergeant Vowles and being detained and questioned. Those meetings with him the night before had shattered my morale, causing me to look upon this hellhound of the law as a sleepless prowler who rambled incessantly and was bound to appear out of a trap just at the moment when you could best have done without him. So I stayed where I was. I hitched myself into position 46 in the hope that it would be easier on the FPs than the last 45, and had another shot at the Dreamless. The thing that always beats me is how on these occasions one ever gets to sleep at all. Personally, I abandoned all idea of it at an early stage, and no one accordingly could have been more surprised than myself when, just as I was endeavouring to give the miss to a leopard which was biting me rather shrewdly in the seat of the trousers, I suddenly awoke to discover that it had been but a dream, that in reality no leopards were to be noticed among those present, that the sun was up and another day had begun, and that on the green sward without the early bird was already breakfasting and making the dickens of a noise about it too. I went to the door and looked out. I could hardly believe that it was really morning, but it was, and a dashed good morning at that. The air was cool and fresh, there were long shadows across the lawn, and everything combined to give the soul such a kick that many fellows in my position would have taken off their socks and done rhythmic dances in the dew. I didn't actually do that, but I certainly felt uplifted to no little extent, and you might say that I was simply so much pure spirit, without any material side to me whatsoever, when suddenly it was as if the old Tum had come out of a trance with a jerk, and the next moment I was feeling that nothing mattered in this world or the next, except about a quart of coffee and all the eggs and bee you could cram onto a dish. It's a rummy thing about breakfast.
when you've only to press a bell to have the domestic staff racing in with everything on the menu from oatmeal to jams, marmalades and potted meats, you find that all you can look at is a glass of soda water and a rusk. When you can't get it, you feel like a python when the zoo officials have just started to bang the luncheon gong. Speaking for myself, I have as a rule to be more or less lured to the feast. I mean to say, I don't as a general thing become what you might call breakfast conscious till I've had my morning tea and rather thought things over a bit. And I can give no better indication of the extraordinary change which had come over my viewpoint now than by mentioning that there was a young fowl of sorts not far away engaged in getting outside a large pink worm, and I could willingly have joined it at the board. In fact, I would have taken pot luck at this juncture with a buzzard. My watch had stopped, so I couldn't tell what time it was, and another thing I didn't know was when Jeeves was planning to go to the Dower House to keep our tryst. The thought that he might even now be on his way there, and that if he didn't find me he would give the thing up as a bad job and retire to some impregnable fastness in the back parts of the hall, gave me a very nasty turn. I left the summer-house, and taking to the bushes, began to work my way through them, treading like a Red Indian on the trail and keeping well under cover throughout. And I was just navigating round the side of the house and making ready for the dash into the open, when through the French window of the morning room I saw a spectacle which affected me profoundly. In fact, you'd be about right if you said that it seemed to speak to my very depths. Inside the room, a parlour-maid was placing a large tray on a table. The sunlight streaming in lit up this parlour-maid's hair, and noting its auburn hue, I deduced that she must be Mary, the betrothed of Constable Dobson. And at any other time the fact would have been of interest, but I was in no mood now to subject the girl to a critical scrutiny with a view to ascertaining whether the constable had picked a winner or not. My whole attention was earmarked for that tray. It was a well-laden tray. There was a coffee pot on it, also toast in considerable quantity, and furthermore a covered dish. It was this last that touched the spot. Under that cover there might be eggs, there might be bacon, there might be sausages, there might be kidneys, or there might be kippers. I couldn't tell, but whatever there was, it was all right with Bertram, for I'd laid my plans and formed my schemes. The girl was on her way out by this time, and I estimated that I had possibly 50 seconds for the stern task before me. Allow 20 for nipping in, 3 for snaffling the works, and another 25 for getting back into the bushes again, and one had all the makings of a successful enterprise. The moment the door closed, I was speeding on my way. I recked little whether anybody saw me, and I should imagine that had there been eyewitnesses, all they would have seen would have been a sort of blur. I did the first leg of the journey well inside the estimated time, and I had just laid hand on the tray and was about to lift and remove, when there came from outside the door the sound of footsteps. It was a moment for swift thought, and such moments find Bertie Wooster at his best. This morning room, I should mention, was not the small morning room where Dwight and little Seabury had had their epoch-making turn-up. In fact, I'm rather misleading my public in alluding to it as a morning room at all. It was really a study or office, being the place where Chuffy did his estate business, totted up his bills, brooded over the growing cost of agricultural apparatus, and gave the tenants the bird when they called to ask him to knock a bit off the rent. And as you can't get very far with that sort of thing unless you have a pretty good-sized desk, Chuffy had most fortunately had one put in. It stood across one whole corner of the room, and it seemed to beckon to me. 2.5 seconds later, I was behind it, crouching on the carpet and trying to breathe solely through the pores. The next moment the door opened and somebody came in. Feet crossed the floor right up to the desk, and I heard the click as the hidden hand removed the telephone receiver. "Chufnell Regis 294, said a voice, and conceived the sudden rush of relief when I recognized it as one that I'd many a time shaken hands with in the past, the voice, in short, of a friend in need. "Oh, Jeeves," I said, popping up like a jack-in-the-box. You can't rattle Jeeves.
Where scullery maids had had hysterics and members of the peerage had leaped and quivered, he simply regarded me with respectful serenity, and after a civil good morning, went on with the job in hand. He's a fellow who likes to do things in their proper order. Ch15-18, 294, the Seaview Hotel. Could you inform me if Sir Roderick Glossop is in his room? Not yet returned. Thank you. He hung up the receiver and was now at liberty to give the late young master a spot of attention. "Good morning, sir," he said again. "I was not expecting to see you here." "I know, but I had supposed that the arrangement was that we should meet at the Dower House." I shuddered a bit. "Jeeves," I said, "one brief word about the Dower House, and then I should like the subject shelved indefinitely. I know you meant well. I know that when you sent me there your motives were pure to the last drop, but the fact remains that you were dispatching me to a nasty salient. Do you know who was lurking in that house of fear? Brinkley, complete with chopper." "I'm very sorry to hear that, sir. Then I assume that you did not sleep there last night." "No, Jeeves, I didn't. I slept, if you can call it sleeping, in the summer-house. And I was just creeping round through the bushes to try to find you, when I saw that parlour-maid setting out food on the table in here." "His lordship's breakfast, sir." "Where is he?" "He should be down shortly, sir. It's a most fortunate chance that her ladyship should have instructed me to ring up the Seaview Hotel. Otherwise we might have experienced some difficulty in establishing connection." "Yes. What was all that, by the way, the Seaview Hotel stuff?" "Her ladyship is somewhat exercised in her mind about Sir Roderick, sir. I fancy that on reflection she has reached the conclusion that she did not treat him well last night." "Mother love not so hot this morning?" "No, sir." "And it's a case of return and all will be forgiven?" "Precisely, sir. But unfortunately Sir Roderick appears to be missing, and we can secure no information as to what has become of him." I was in a position, of course, to explain and clarify, and I did so without delay. "He's all right. After an invigorating session with Brinkley, he went to my garage to get petrol. Was he correct in supposing that that would clean him as well as butter?" "Yes, sir." "Then I should think he was on his way to London by now, if not actually in the metropolis." "I will notify her ladyship at once, sir. I imagine that the information will serve sensibly to lessen her anxiety." "You really think she loves him still and wishes to extend the amende honorable? Or olive branch?" "Yes, sir. So at least I divined from her demeanour. I was left with the impression that all the old love and esteem were in operation once more." "And I'm very glad to hear it," I said cordially, "for I must tell you, Jeeves, that since we last got together I've completely changed my mind about the above Glossop. I see now that there's much good in him. In the silent watches of the night we formed what you wouldn't be far out in describing as a beautiful friendship. We discovered each other's hidden merits, and he left showering invitations to lunch." "Indeed, sir." "Absolutely. From now on there will always be a knife and fork for Bertram at the Glossop lair, and the same for Roddy Shea Bertram." "Very gratifying, sir." "Most. So if you're chatting with Lady Ch15 in the near future, you can tell her that the match now has my full approval and sanction." "But all this, Jeeves," I proceeded, striking the practical note, "is beside the point. The main issue is that I'm sorely in need of nourishment, and I want that tray. So hand it across and look slippy." "You are proposing to eat his lordship's breakfast, sir?" "Jeeves," I said emotionally, and was about to go on to add that if he had any doubts as to what I was proposing to do to that breakfast, he could remove them by standing to one side and watching me get into action, when once more I heard footsteps in the passage outside. Instead of speaking along these lines, accordingly, I blenched, as near as a fellow can blench when his face is all covered with boot polish, and broke off with a brief heart cry. Once more I perceived that it had become imperative that I vanish from the scene. These footsteps, I must mention, were of the solid, sturdy, shoe number 11 type. It was natural, therefore, that I should assume that it was Chuffy who now stood without, and to encounter Chuffy, I need scarcely say, would have been foreign to my policy. I've already indicated with, I think, sufficient clearness that he was not in sympathy with my aims and objects.
That interview we had had on the previous night had shown me that he was to be reckoned as essentially one of the opposition, a hostile element and a menace. Let him discover me here, and the first thing I knew he would be locking me up somewhere in a spirit of chivalrous zeal and sending messengers to old Stoker to drop round and collect. Long, therefore, before the handle had turned, I was down in the depths like a diving duck. The door opened. A female voice spoke, no doubt that of the future Mrs. Constable Dobson.
"Mr. Stoker," it announced. Large, flat feet clumped into the room. Chapter 18. Black Work in a Study. I wedged myself a little tighter in behind the old zareba. "Not so good, not so good," a voice seemed to be whispering in my ear. Of all the unpleasant contingencies which could have arisen, this seemed to me to be about the scaliest. Whatever might have been said against Chufnell Hall, and recent events had tended considerably to lessen its charm in my eyes, I'd supposed that you could put forward at least one thing in its favour, viz. That there was no possible chance of encountering J. Washburn Stoker on the premises. And in spite of having my time fairly fully occupied with feeling like a jelly, I was still able to experience quite a spot of honest indignation at what I considered a dashed unjustifiable intrusion on his part. I mean to say, if a man has thrown his weight about in a stately home of England, ticking off the residence and asserting positively that he jolly well isn't going to darken its doors again, he's no right to come strolling in, barely 2 days later, as if the place were an hotel with welcome on the mat. I felt pretty strongly about the whole thing. I was also wondering how Jeeves would handle this situation. By this time, a shrewd bloke like this Stoker was bound to have guessed that his were the brains behind my escape, and it seemed not unlikely that he would make some tentative move towards scattering these brains on the hearthrug. His voice, when he spoke, undoubtedly indicated that some such idea was floating in his mind. It was harsh and roopy. And though all that he actually said by way of a start was "ah," a determined man can get a lot of meaning into an "ah." "Good morning, sir," said Jeeves. This business of lying curled up behind desks cuts both ways. It has its advantages and its drawbacks. Purely from the standpoint of the slinking fugitive, of course, fine. Indeed, could scarcely be bettered. But against this must be set the fact that it undoubtedly hampers a chap in his capacity of audience. The effect now was much the same as if I'd been listening in to a dramatic sketch on the wireless. I got the voices, but I missed the play of expression, and I'd have given a lot to be able to see it. Not Jeeves's, of course, because Jeeves never has any, but Stoker's, it seemed to me, would have been well worth more than a casual glance. "So you're here, are you?" "Yes, sir." The next item was an extremely nasty laugh from the visitor, one of those hard, short, sharp ones. "I came here because I wanted information about where Mr. Wooster has got to. I thought that Lord Chufnell might possibly have seen him. I never reckoned I should run into you. Say, listen," said the Stoker disease, suddenly hotting up. "Do you know what I've a mind to do to you?" "No, sir." "Break your damned neck." "Indeed, sir." "Yes." I heard Jeeves cough. "A little extreme, sir, surely? I can appreciate that the fact that I decided somewhat abruptly, I admit, to leave your employment and return to that of his lordship should occasion displeasure on your part. But you know what I'm talking about. Or are you going to deny that it was you who smuggled that guy Wooster off my yacht?" "No, sir. I admit that I was instrumental in restoring his liberty to Mr. Wooster. In the course of a conversation which I had with him, Mr. Wooster informed me that he was being detained on the vessel uproarious, and acting in your best interest, I released him. At that time, you will recall, sir, I was in your employment, and I felt it my duty to save you from what might have been an extremely serious contretemps." I couldn't see, of course, but I received the impression from a certain amount of gurgling and snorting which he put in during these remarks that old Stoker would have been glad to have the floor a bit earlier. I could have told him it wasn't any good. You can't switch Jeeves off when he's something to say which he feels will be of interest. The only thing is to stand by and wait till he runs down. But though he had now done so, it wasn't right away that the party of the second part stated anything in the nature of a counterspeech. I imagine that the substance of Jeeves's little talk had given him food for thought. In this conjecture it appeared that I was correct. Old Stoker breathed a bit tensely for a while, then he spoke in almost an awed voice. It's often that way when you get up against Jeeves. He has a way of suggesting new viewpoints. Are you crazy, or am I? Sir, save me, did you say, from a contretemps? Yes, sir. I cannot make the assertion authoritatively, for I am not certain to what extent the fact that Mr. Wooster came on board the yacht of his own volition would weigh with a jury. Jury? But his detention on the vessel, despite his expressed desire to leave, would, I am inclined to imagine, constitute an act of kidnapping, the penalties for which, as you are no doubt aware, sir, are very severe. But say, listen, England is an extremely law-abiding country, sir, and offences which might pass unnoticed in your own land are prosecuted here with the greatest rigour. My knowledge of legal minutiae is, I regret to say, slight, so I cannot asseverate with perfect confidence that this detention of Mr. Wooster would have ranked as an act in contravention of the criminal code, and, as such, liable to punishment with penal servitude, but undoubtedly, had I not intervened, the young gentleman would have been in a position to bring a civil action, and mulct you in very substantial damages. So, acting, as I say, in your best interest, sir, I released Mr. Wooster. There was a silence. Thanks, said old Stoker mildly. Not at all, sir. Thank you very much. I did what I considered the only thing that could avert a most disagreeable contingency, sir. Darn good of you. I must say, I can't see why Jeeves shouldn't go down in legend and song. Daniel did, on the strength of putting in half an hour or so in the lion's den and leaving the dumb chums in a condition of suavity and camaraderie. And if what Jeeves had just done wasn't entitled to rank well above a feat like that, I'm no judge of form. In less than 5 minutes, he'd reduced this ravening stoker from a sort of human wildcat to a positive domestic pet. If I hadn't been there and heard it, I wouldn't have believed it was possible. I've got to think about this, said old Stoker, milder than ever. Yes, sir. I hadn't looked at it that way before. Yes, sir. I've got to think about this. I believe I'll go for a walk and mull it over in my mind. The Lord Chuffnell hasn't seen Mr. Wooster, has he? Not since last night, sir. Oh, he saw him last night, did he? Which way was he headed? Oh, I rather fancy it was Mr. Wooster's intention to pass the night in the Dower House and return to London today. The Dower House? That's that place across the park? Yes, sir. Oh, I might look in there. It seems to me the first thing I've got to do is have a talk with Mr. Wooster. Yes, sir. I heard him go out through the French window, but it wasn't till another moment or two had passed that I felt justified in coming to the surface. It being reasonable to suppose by then that the coast was clear, I poked the head up over the desk. Jeeves, I said, and if there were tears in the eyes, what of it? We Woosters are not afraid to confess honest emotion. There is none like you. None. It is extremely kind of you to say so, sir. It was all I could do to keep from leaping out and shaking your hand. It would scarcely have been judicious in the circumstances, sir. That's what I thought. Your father wasn't a snake charmer, was he, Jeeves? No, sir. It just crossed my mind. What do you think will happen when old Stoker gets to the Dower House? We can only conjecture, sir. My fear is that Brinkley may have slept it off by now. There is that possibility, sir. Still, it was a kindly thought sending the fellow there, and we must hope for the best. After all, Brinkley still has that chopper. I say, do you think Chuffy is really coming down? At any moment, I fancy, sir. Then you wouldn't advise my eating his breakfast? No, sir. But I'm starving, Jeeves. I'm extremely sorry, sir. The position at the moment is a little difficult. Later on, no doubt, I may be able to alleviate your distress. Have you had breakfast, Jeeves? Yes, sir. What did you have? The juice of an orange, sir, followed by cute Crispies and American cereal, scrambled eggs with a slice of bacon, and toast and marmalade. Oh, gosh, the whole washed down, no doubt, with a cup of strengthening coffee. Yes, sir. Oh, my God! You really don't think I could just sneak a single sausage? I would scarcely advocate it, sir, and it is a small point, but his lordship is having kippers. Kippers? And this, I fancy, will be his lordship coming now, sir. So down once more into the lower levels for Bertram, and I had hardly fitted myself into the groove when the door opened. A voice spoke. "Why, hello, Jeeves." "Good morning, miss." It was Pauline Stoker. I must say I was a bit peeved. Chuffnell Hall, whatever its other defects, should, as I've pointed out, have been entirely free from stokers, and here they were, absolutely overrunning the place like mice. I was quite prepared to find something breathing in my ear and look round and see little Dwight. I mean to say, I was feeling bitterly, I admit, that if this was going to be an old home week of stokers, one might as well make the thing complete. Pauline had begun to sniff vigorously. "What's that I smell, Jeeves?" "Kippered herrings, miss." "Whose?" "His lordship's, miss." "Oh, I haven't had breakfast yet, Jeeves." "No, miss." "No. Father yanked me out of bed and had me halfway here before I was properly awake. He's all worked up, Jeeves." "Yes, miss. I've just been having a conversation with Mr. Stoker. He did appear somewhat overwrought." "All the way here he was talking about what he was going to do if he ever found you again, and now you tell me he did find you. What happened? Didn't he eat you?" "No, miss." "Probably on a diet. Well, where's he got to? They told me he was in here." "Mr. Stoker left a moment ago with the intention of visiting the Dower House, miss. I think he hopes to find Mr. Wooster there." "Somebody ought to warn that poor sap." "You need experience no anxiety for Mr. Wooster, miss. He is not at the Dower House." "Where is he?" "Elsewhere, miss." "Not that I care where he is. Do you remember my telling you last night, Jeeves, that I was thinking of becoming Mrs. Bertram W.? "Yes, miss." "Well, I'm not. So you needn't save up for that fish slice after all. I've changed my mind." "I'm glad to hear that, miss." So was I. Her words were music to my ears. "Glad, are you?" "Yes, miss. I doubt whether the union would have been a successful one. Mr. Wooster is an agreeable young gentleman, but I would describe him as essentially one of nature's bachelors. Besides being mentally negligible. Mr. Wooster is capable of acting very shrewdly on occasion, miss." "So am I. And that's why I say that no matter if Father does tear the roof off, I'm not going to marry that poor persecuted lamb. Why should I? I've nothing against him." There was a pause. "I've just been talking to Lady Chuffnell, Jeeves." "Yes, miss." "Apparently she's had a little domestic trouble, too." "Yes, miss. There was an unfortunate rift between her ladyship and Sir Roderick Glossop last night, and now I'm glad to say her ladyship appears to have thought matters over and decided that she made a mistake in severing relations with that gentleman." One does think things over, doesn't one?" "Almost invariably, miss." "And a fat lot of use that is, if the severed relation doesn't think them over, too. Have you seen Lord Chuffnell this morning, Jeeves?" "Yes, miss." "How was he looking?" "Somewhat worried, it seemed to me, miss." "He was?" "Yes, miss." Well, I won't keep you from your professional duties, Jeeves. Smack into them right away, as far as I'm concerned." "Thank you, miss. Good morning." For some moments after the door closed, I remained motionless. I was passing the position of affairs under thoughtful review. To a certain extent, you might say that relief was tingling through the veins like some rare wine, causing satisfaction and mental uplift. In the plainest possible language, weighing her words and speaking without dubiety or equivocation, this girl Pauline had stated that not even the strongest measures on the part of her father would induce her to shove on the old bridal veil and step up the aisle at my side. So far, so good. But had she thoroughly estimated that father's powers of persuasion? That was what I asked myself. Had she ever seen him when he was really going good? Was she aware of what a force he could be when in mid-season form? In a word, did she realize what she was up against, and know that to attempt to thwart J. Washburn Stoker, when in spate, was like entering a jungle and taking on the first couple of wildcats you encountered? It was this thought which prevented my rapture from being complete. It seemed to me that in opposing her will to that of a bally retired pirate like this male parent of hers, the frail girl was going out of her class, and that her resistance to his matrimonial plans would be useless. And I was musing thus, when I suddenly heard the sloosh of coffee in a cup, and a moment later there came what Drexdale Yates would have called a metallic clang. And with profound emotion I divined that Pauline, unable to resist the sight of that tray any longer, had poured herself out a steaming beaker and was getting at the kippers. For there was no longer any possible room for doubt as to the correctness of Jeeves's information. It was the scent of kippered herrings that was now wafted to me like a benediction, and I clenched my fists till the knuckles stood out white beneath the strain. I could mark every mouthful, and each in turn went through me like a knife. It's odd, the effect hunger has on one. You can't tell what you will do under the stress of it. Let the most level-headed bird get really peckish, and he will throw prudence to the winds. I did so at this point. Obviously the sound scheme was for me to remain under cover and wait till all these stokers and what-not blew over. And that was the policy which, in a calmer frame of mind, I would have pursued. But the smell of those kippers, and the knowledge that with every moment that passed they were melting away like snow upon the mountain-tops, and that pretty soon all the toast would be gone as well, was too powerful for me. I came up from behind that desk like a minnow on a hook. "Hi!" I said, speaking with a strong note of pleading in my voice. It's rummy how experience never teaches us. I'd seen the reaction of the scullery maid to my sudden appearance. I'd noted its effect on old Chuffy, and I'd watched Sir Roderick Glossop at the moment of impact. Yet here I was, bobbing up in just the same sudden fashion as before, and exactly the same thing happened again, if anything rather more so. At the moment Pauline Stoker was busy with a mouthful of kipper, and this, for the nonce, cramped her freedom of expression, so that all that occurred for about a second and a quarter was that a pair of horrified eyes stared into mine. Then the barrier of kipper gave way, and one of the most devastating yowls of terror I've ever heard in my puff ripped through the air. It coincided with the opening of the door and the appearance on the threshold of the 5th Baron Chuffnor, and the next moment he dashed at her and gathered her in his arms, and she dashed at him and been gathered. They couldn't have done it more neatly if they'd been rehearsing for weeks.